and we're getting things started for 2024. We're starting this year out with some really good veteran legislators. They've been through 1 year of learning what it's all about, and so we should be able to go pretty quick this year right into budgets. So I'm going to start things out by asking if anyone has any bills to introduce. Okay, no new bills to introduce for today. So second thing on the agenda was a presentation by research. They're going to explain to us a little bit about the budgeting process. This was something that if some of you looked at your reports from last year, you'll see a document that was handed out to everybody that has a little information for each one of the different areas, each one of the agencies, and it explains a little bit about it. So want you to kind of start there. So I'm going to turn this over to research. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. For the record, my name is Dylan Deere. I'm the Assistant Director for Fiscal Affairs for the Research Department. I've been with the department for about 15 years. And I think for the first year ever, I do not have a budget before general government budget. So it's going to be a little different. So I'm going to talk to you about performance-based budgeting. And performance-based budgeting came around about 2016. There was the state had contracted with an outside contractor called Alvarez and Marsal, and Alvarez and Marsal made a large number of recommendations. But one of those recommendations was to implement a system of performance budgeting that ties outcomes to dollars. All right. And so, in response to that, the legislature passed a bill, 2637, and which has now become KSA 75 3718B, that sort of lays out what is supposed to be in a performance budget. And through that process, it was a 3-phase implementation. The first phase of that, agencies went in, they sort of figured out, they did what's called a program inventory. So they identified all the various things that they did and they wrote them down. Okay. Then they looked at the accounting system. Okay, and they tried to bring the accounting system in alignment with those programs, because as is sort of human nature over time, a lot of those budget units had sort of clumped together. So you had big budget units for agencies. So a lot of agencies were really encouraged to break those budget units apart and sort of identify specific expenditures with specific programs. And the third phase of the implementation was actual measures that were to be implemented. And all agencies were sort of working on these measures over time, but it's the third phase, which those were supposed to be done. Now, I should clarify, there's a document called a budget narrative that's still in statute. Agencies are required to submit to both the House Appropriations, Senate Ways and Means Committee, and the Director of the Division of Budget, which describes their budget submissions. And there's a bunch of performance measures in there. And so agencies have been doing performance measures for years and years and years and years. The goal of performance budgeting was a little bit different in that the performance measures that were developed were supposed to be really help with decision makers in the decision making process. So a lot of the measures that you see in a DA 400 or a budget narrative or whatever you want to call it are really designed around allowing agencies to monitor their own sort of internal processes. Okay, and performance budgets were intended to be sort of more outward facing. Okay, for decision makers to help them make the decisions about how to effectively allocate resources. So this document that I gave you right here, okay, I just put together the foreword, and I put together a first couple of budgets that you're actually going to see that are going to appear before this agency, or before this committee. This is we're going to do this a little differently this year. There's still going to be a PDF publication that's about 1,200 pages long, okay, that has all of the performance measures for all the various agencies that you can go and print out if you want to. But the other thing is you'll find links in this document and online to our data visualization. So what KLRD has done is we've taken all of the state expenditures for the last 10 years, we've integrated them into a Tableau interface. Okay. And so anytime you're curious about how much an agency is spending and what kind of program, whether it's from the SGF or whether it's from all funds, whether they're spending on salaries and wages or whether they're contracting out all their work, all that data is inside of our data viz. In addition to that, there will also be the ability to pull down these performance measures as well. And that should be standing up probably sometime this week, maybe the beginning of next week. That'll be available. So rather than having to page through a 1,200 page document, okay, you have the option of going to that specific agency page and pulling up the performance measures for that page at the same time. And so you compare the performance measure output data that they're providing you with the expenditure data on the data viz that'll be right next to it. So you can see those two pieces of information together. So I've been asked to just sort of walk through a sort of performance measures for an agency. The Board of Accountancy is the one I chose because it starts with an A, is the only reason. So it's alphabetically first. There's a couple other, like barbering starts with a B, so you're going to get that one next. All right, and I want to sort of talk about the things that you're going to see before you. And all of these items on this page are required by statute. So this is all written into KSA 753718B. It's not things that the Kansas Legislative Research Department or the Division of Budget sort of willy-nilly decided to put on this page. We are required by law to request these specific items. The first one is the consequences of not funding this program. The simple is, item here is, if this program were not to exist, what would be the consequences of that? The second is statutory basis. So all agencies have a sort of combination of statutes, which are often the statute that originally creates them, and regulations, okay, that allows them to do their job on a day-to-day basis, which are regularly sort of changed. And these should be contained within the statutory basis box that comes next. Occasionally, you'll see permissive or something like that, or you'll see a blank. And those are situations in which an agency may be doing something that's not technically required by statute, but they consider to be within their mission. And you'll see that come up from time to time. The second is mandatory or discretionary, and that's what we just discussed. And then MOE match requirement. So this is in reference to federal funds. So if there's federal funds inside of an agency, and those funds have a maintenance of effort or match requirement, it will say yes in that box. And when I'm talking about maintenance of effort, it means that you lose some portion of federal funds if you don't keep a certain funding level, okay? Or you lose, or there's a match, a 1-to-1 match, sometimes a 3-to-1 match, okay, from federal funds to state funds. And the purpose of behind that, and when the legislature was deciding whether or not to put that requirement in is just to know when you're going into it, when you cut SGF, if you're only impacting SGF or special revenue funds, or if maybe there's a greater federal fund impact that you should be aware of. And then we have priority level, okay? And for single program agencies like the Board of Accountancy, it will almost always be one. But for an agency like the Department of Agriculture, which has dozens of programs, then they are supposed to be ranking those to say, like, if I had to make a decision on what is the most important, how would I rank this particular program? That is challenging for agencies, particularly when those programs are statutorily required. So if you're required by statute to do something, how can you have anything except a rank of 1? This is also not what I would consider to be a priority-based budget. There's other states, such as Texas, that have a priority-based budgeting system. The agencies have everything priority-based budget, done out by priority, and then the legislature just comes in and says, "I'll give you $10 million, and you fund those priorities until you run out of money." That is not what this is. It's simply a communication tool to the legislature about how they would prioritize their budgets. The next item you have on here, and feel free to stop me at any time, is program goals. Okay, so those program goals should be related to what the program objectives are, or the program mission, but basically how they're going to accomplish the mission of the agency. And they're going to be listed A, B, C, D for however many goals there are. And the reason I tell you that is because it's going to come into effect when I get into the table a little bit later. And then a little bit about program history comes next. This section is often quite long, but if you're curious about how an agency came about or what it used to be before it was the Board of Accountancy, you can often find that in this box. In this case, it was originally in 1915 created as the Board of Examiners for the Board of Accountancy. Maybe a little bit less useful, but some good trivia contained within that program history box. And turning to performance measures. All right. So what you see is two major groupings of different types of measures. You have outcome measures and you have output measures. Outcome measures are intended to be a measure of what is an agency's objectives. So in other words, how is an agency achieving their objectives? What do they consider to be their purpose? All right. An output measure is really about activity. So it really doesn't determine how effectively they're accomplishing their goals. It's much more about what it is they're doing and what volume of churn that's going on. Frankly, these are good categories to help an agency sort of think about what their goals should be. I wouldn't get too hung up on them about outcome versus output, as long as those measures are really telling you what you need to know, okay, which is, are they accomplishing their outcomes? Are they achieving their objectives? All right, you have a column here, goals, A, D, C, and each one of these measures is supposed to tie back to one of those goals. So if you have a goal that doesn't appear in some of your measures, then you have to ask, how are you going? This is your goal. How are you measuring whether or not you're achieving that goal or not? And then we have some historical data. We have 20 actuals, 21 actuals, 22, and 23. Okay, so you have 4 years of actual data. You have the previous 23 estimates. So in other words, this is what they did last year to estimate what they were going to do in 23. So the question then becomes, if the Board of Accountancy assumed that the total number of certificates would be 13,331, and they actually did 13,347, well, they did a pretty good job of estimating how many certificates they were likely to do. And then their 24 estimate is 13,438 and 13,539. So they're saying that they anticipate growth in the number of accountants in the state of Kansas over the next 2 years. And then you have a couple of additional measures: total number of complaints filed, total number of CPA firms, total number of permit holders, and then hearings held and outputs, certificate holders, CPA firms, new permits. So that's just one example from one agency of how the performance budgets are structured. It's critical in this part of the process to sort of, for the legislators to sort of provide feedback. This process works best when it's a two-way street. So if these are not the measures that you need to help you make decisions about whether or not an agency is accomplishing its goals, then this would be an opportunity during the budget hearing process to sort of talk about what you would like to see from an agency for those goals. I'd like to mention one other type of measure that I consider to be an outcome measure that doesn't have its own category, but is critical when you're doing sort of performance budgeting, and that's efficiency measures. Okay, an efficiency measure is when you take whatever your primary outcome is that you wish to achieve and divide it by the number of dollars you spend to achieve that outcome. So you take that, you run that division. If it costs $500 per outcome, it costs $1,000 per outcome. Those are really effective measures. And then you could see those over time. Is it costing more, or is it costing less, or is it costing the same amount of money to achieve the outcomes that the agency is trying to achieve? And so those typically fall into outcome measures. When you don't see an efficiency measure, that's a good opportunity to have a sort of conversation about what different types of efficiency measures could be used in order to be able to sort of more effectively make decisions about how to allocate resources inside of a budget. Now, I also provided the Board of Barbering budget here. I also provided the budget for the Board of Cosmetology. And I think there's one more: Board of Examiners and Optometry. And these are all drafts. Okay, so we're still going through the approval process, getting this all through editing. But this is all going to show up inside of our data viz over the next week or so that you can pull these down and look at these individually. And also this is a good conversation to have during a budget hearing. The reason performance budgeting is often a good conversation, or these types of performance measures are a good conversation, is because we use in the state of Kansas what's referred to as an incremental budgeting system. All right. That means that if you look at our budget analysis, okay, what we talk about is the difference from the previously approved budget or the difference from a previous request. Now, that's usually a couple of percentage points, maybe only a couple of small items. Now, the consequences of that is that a large portion of any particular budget goes undiscussed, unreviewed in any particular fiscal year. Because if there's no changes, it really does not get discussed in a system of incremental budgeting. And that's inevitable at some level because many of these agency budgets are so large. It would be an overwhelming challenge for this committee or any committee to sort of review them in that kind of depth. But a performance budgeting process at least allows a committee to have a conversation about what it is that the agency is trying to do, why does it exist, whether or not it's accomplishing the purposes for existing, and how much does it cost to do that. With that, I would stand for questions about my presentation on performance budgeting.
All right, committee, any questions? Representative Riley.
Dylan, thank you very much for that presentation. I just want to kind of boil this down to if anybody has some maybe simpler questions that you would like to ask, but I'm going to go back through those steps that you went through. And, I know there's some history here behind that very first line on there of consequences of not funding this agency. It has probably something to do with the whole thought process of, why does this exist? Why are we paying money for this? That kind of thing. But it would seem more important that we would have a box in there that would maybe have their mission statement in there, more of a positive thing rather than a negative thing. And this is just a suggestion. But when I was going through and reviewing some of these budgets, it seemed like they were sticking their mission statement in where the program goals were. And that in itself is confusing. And specifically, so maybe we need to have a box so people look at, why am I in business? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Well, there's the statutes up there, and this is the reasons why if you don't give me any money, what might happen wrong. But it doesn't tell us why you are in business and why you are getting this budgeted money. So I'm just wondering whether we need to add a positive of what your mission statement is. And then to reinforce your statement about the program goals, as I went through this last summer looking at the different budgets that we look at, and again, we only have 23, but as I was looking through those different budgets and I started looking at the outcomes, and very, very few departments really understood the association or the effect of why they have program goals and how that is affected by the outcomes. And so probably this very first example is a good example of that, where they have said, okay, here's our goals. Here's what we're going to do to achieve those goals, which I would almost say that the maybe the output measure should be above the outcome measures. I mean, that's a minor thought, but what that is saying what internally, like you mentioned, activity, what are we doing in order to serve our public? And so then those goals that they have in there, those, the total number of hearings that they held, well, they had a goal. It was goal D. It was up above. That's relational. We understand that. So, and then how did that work? Well, that's our outcome measures. And so I can say, well, we did this. And because we did that, our outcomes are this. And and goal D is related to goal D. Does that make sense to you? And so there is, a step by step thing that I think our different departments and agencies should look at, not just for us, but for their own internal audits, for their own internal understanding of, well, you've been doing this for 80 years now. Have you lost your way? You've been doing this for 30 years now. Have you lost your way? What is your mission? What are you doing with the tax dollars? But who are you trying to provide this for? Who is your public? Is your public the general public, or is your public accountants? Is your public the general public, or is your public barbers or cosmetologists? And so how are you serving them? That kind of thing. So it seems to me that we have some challenges of departments, and this might be a 2-year phase in, but them to start, our department starting understanding what their mission is, why they're in business, and what we can do. So I wasn't taking anything away from you, Dylan. I was just making a comment there. So any other questions?
All right, any other questions? But Representative Pickard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was thinking, I know this would help me if there was a rubric that we could fill out for each agency that would hit these different things, you know. So I'd remember to do the efficiency measure and, you know, just because we go pretty fast. But if we could actually take a little bit of time and, you know, chew on this and really be effective in helping agencies pick this up. But yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's something we could work on. I'm thinking 4 or 5 questions maybe that you would ask about any particular program as you're going into it. You know, are the program goals related to the program mission? Is there an efficiency measure? You know, so, you know, 4 or 5 just really quick questions that you can ask in any particular case. And the answer may very well be yes. The agency can point to it and says, yeah, look at outcome measure number 3. That's your efficiency measure that you're seeing there. But yeah, we can put something together for you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yep.
Close enough. Thank you, Mr.
Representative Amos. I got to get back into the mode of things here.
Dylan, and you probably said this in your explanation. What determination is made, and it's probably done by statute, difference between mandatory and discretionary? It seems to me that I look at some of these things and they're all boards of examiners and they're all doing pretty much the same thing. But some are discretionary and some are mandatory. Can you explain that?
So when you see a discretionary, that means that that particular program does not have a clear association with a specific statute. Okay, so it means that it may very well, the agency may have been doing it for 40 years or more, but there's not really, and it's clearly within the gambit of the sort of responsibilities of the agency. It has been considered to be such, but there's really not a specific statute that requires it. It maybe is a responsibility that was sort of inherited from another agency. That happens on occasion. Sometimes it was simply a determination made at some point in time that, well, it sort of makes sense that they would fall and have those sort of responsibilities. The adjutant general has a variety of responsibilities that they have taken on over time that are considered to be more permissive in nature, but are clearly within the scope of the authority of the adjutant general and sort of fit their mission. But there's not a specific statute that requires it. And so that would be an example of when you'd see those sort of distinctions.
So as I look at like the Board of Optometry and their program goals are to license qualified optometrists and investigate reports of infractions and administer appropriate resolutions. They've got a statutory basis, so I assume I got to read that to be able to find out if anything in there talks about this agency. According to what the board has brought forward, they were created in 1909, so you know they've been around for a while. And they look like they are basically doing the same thing as the other licensing agencies. So, but they're discretionary. And so, you know, I guess I look at that and wonder, okay, why can that be different?
So in this particular case, I would have to advise you to just ask the agency about why they decided to identify that as a discretionary goal. And it may be related to the way they perceive their organizing statutes. Sometimes the organizing statute will simply create the Board of Optometry, but sort of leave it up to the board for how to go about accomplishing those goals. And so, I hate to do this, but in this case, that would really be a good question for the Board of Optometry when you hear their budget.
Chairman, I think that is a good idea. Some of the times, we're asking our own staff here to be able to provide us the information that really needs to be coming from the agencies that are making the presentations before us. So I think we need to be very, very careful about, who we ask those particular questions, because the way I see it is these agencies are the ones that are asking us to approve these budgets. So we're passing them along to go to appropriations anyway. So I appreciate that answer. Thanks, Doug.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so Dylan, what you're saying is that and you don't know for sure because you haven't looked at the statute, but the statute might not say that they're specifically have to license. It just creates the board for that purpose if they.
It's entirely, that could be one case. In this case, I'm gonna.
But some might specifically.
Some might just create the board, particularly very old ones.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's it. But could some of it be that just the philosophy of the board of whether or not they think it's mandatory or discretionary?
It is, because we are not reviewing these, and I want to make this 100% clear. We are not reviewing these for accuracy. So the Legislative Research Department's not going through here and saying, is this the correct statute? Is this mandatory or discretionary? What we're trying to do is convey the data and provide a channel from the agency to you in a standardized format so it's more easily consumable. So I do not ask our analysts to go and review all this data because they're too busy with the budgets. So
yeah, so that's for the representative has a very good point when it comes to the questions that are asked. Those are probably questions that need to be asked. Why do you feel like it? When one, we have, and I don't know, I haven't looked here, but the Board of Barbering has it mandatory, but yet Board of Optometry has it as a discretionary. So why, why do you believe it's discretionary, not mandatory when we have those discussions? So just some of the things. Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So will there be a time, I think you alluded to it a little bit, but will there be a time that you'll come back to our committee and maybe give us a little presentation on your dashboard and how we can go and find some of this information? Because the little information that I saw from last year on what you did on your dashboard has been 100% improved even more. And so maybe you could come back and give us a small demonstration so people could log on and see that.
Yeah, we could probably work something out in the next week or two to do that.
Always happy.
Yeah. Dylan's been working on this for a long time as far as trying to kind of move us to this point. So any other questions? All right, Dylan, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. And committee, I'm sorry I was late. I got to get in the mode of things and my meeting's running too close to each other. And so thank you. Taking over for me, Vice Chair. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we are looking at over the next couple of weeks here. So starting on the 18th, we are going to start our budget hearings. So we are, because of an agreement that was made between the Speaker's office and the governor, our fiscal analysts received the budgets a lot earlier than normal, because normally they wouldn't have received those budgets until she gave her State of the State. She actually gave the budgets to them sometime in December so that they could start working on it. So they are actually starting now to have some of them done, especially the easy ones, the smaller ones, I guess I would say, maybe not easy, but smaller ones. And so we are going to get to those quicker. Now, what that's going to mean is we're going to have a little bit more time to look at them, except for the first ones. So we will have on the 18th next week, we will have the Board of Barbering, Board of Cosmetology, and the Board of Tax Appeals. That will be on, let's see, that's Thursday. I have to report that one out on Tuesday of that next week. So just remember that, as this one is the only one that we're going to be kind of rushed on, I feel like, in the schedule. So I'd kind of like for you guys to, we will try to get those to you as quick as we can as far as the budgets, so you can look at them. We might, if everybody is interested, we might go ahead and do recommendations that day, or we'll have to come back on Friday and do recommendations. So it's kind of, it's kind of one of those things that, so we'll, yeah, you kind of give me your, you can do it offline or whatever, kind of what you want to do. And we can kind of discuss it too after we hear from them on Thursday. We kind of decide at that point whether we want to go ahead and do. And then we're going to have we'll have a little bit of time before we start the other ones. And then we're going to have some, a little bit more time between the time period that we hear them and the time period that we will make recommendations, and then when I have to report them out. So these first ones are kind of quick, but the rest of them won't be quite as quick. Our hope is to have all budgets done in appropriations by the first part of March. So it's still pretty quick, but not as bad as it was, because a lot of times it was February 1st or more before we were able to start. So gives us a little bit more time. So that's the schedule. So next week we will not meet on Monday. What did I have, Susan? What's the? Oh, that's right. I'm still thinking. That's this week that we're. He's okay. Yeah. I'll tell you what, people, I can't keep my brain square today. Yes, okay. So on Monday we will start a lot of the other budgets. Yeah. So, but as far as this week, I'm sorry, this week. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the rest of this week, that's the schedule. We will meet. We will not meet tomorrow. We will meet Thursday, and then depending on what you guys decide on those three budgets, we'll meet on, possibly not meet on Friday, or we will meet on Friday, depending on what you want to do. So, and then we will start the rest of some hearings of some of the other budgets on Monday. So,
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So if we're really good, will we have any tours this year?
I don't know. We'll have to see. I think we'll actually have a little bit of extra time. It may be after we get the budgets done, but I think, well, I think we'll be done quick enough that as far as the session, we're not going to have to meet the whole time. So, yeah. There's that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to meet on the 18th on Thursday. And hopefully we'll wrap those up. Just so that you know, I made a doctor's appointment Friday afternoon, but those are hard to get. But I just want to make for sure, and then we'll start in all earnest on Monday, correct? Okay.
Yeah. And
We should be
really, the barber, cosmetology, and tax appeals, I'm not sure we're gonna. I think we could probably do them on the same day, as long as hopefully we can get the actual budgets to everybody. Maybe hopefully by tomorrow. You think?
We should be able to get the budgets to you. I'll give you a little heads up. They're going to be marked draft because they've been through the majority of the editing process, but there's a final checkoff that hasn't been completed in all cases. But we've had like 4 people look at them at this point, so we should be able to get some for you.
Okay. So we'll get those to you tomorrow, and that way you have a little bit of time to look at them before the meeting on Thursday. So, all right. Did you ask for build reductions? Okay. All right. So if there's nothing else, sorry for me being delayed. I will endeavor not to do that again, because otherwise, Representative
Last year.
I know I did last year. Representative Turk over there he'll Yeah, I know. He'll go after me. So, did you give him permission? Okay. All right. Well, I'm excited to have another good year of looking at these budgets, and I'm sure that it will be very productive. So, with that,